Turn this on. Okay, we're going to come to order, and Todd has a few things to say. Then I have a very brief, not my usual thing to say. So I promise.
All right, I'll be brief. Since last week's meeting, I've been inundated with calls and texts about Facebook posts and letters to the editor. I feel the need to address what I believe to be an inaccurate statement in one of the letters that was Mr. Harden wrote to the editor. My reason for addressing this is, one, because it directly pertains to the issue of the interior part of the property maintenance code, and two, so that you will have the most accurate information possible to make your decision. It is most certainly not in any way to besmirch Mr. Harden. Before I address this, I want to tell you a little bit about my dealings with John. John owns the Sundance Townhomes located at Melrose and Cedar Heights in Jonesboro. John's efforts to improve and maintain the property, attract and keep responsible tenants, and enforce the rules of his lease have reduced the number of crimes reported by almost 70%, and reduced the calls for service by over 76%. He is also the only apartment community in Jonesboro to have qualified to participate in Jonesboro's crime-free multi-housing program directed at reducing crimes in multifamily, in and around multifamily housing. What was several years ago an oasis in a high crime area of Jonesboro has started to spread to some other apartment communities in the area. There's no doubt, or there are no doubt, cheaper and easier ways to make money in the rental business. But John has committed to doing so in such a way as it is concerned with the safety and dignity of his responsible tenants as it is the bottom line. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Todd.
John's letter, which was directed towards the preceding committee, to the committee that discussed the International Property Maintenance Code, stated, it was, quote, "It was further recommended by that committee after many painstaking long meetings that this would be an exterior property maintenance code and have nothing to do with the interior of any person's property, private or commercial. Part of what helped make that recommendation was that the city in the past had received zero complaints of any property about interior alone." End quote. The previous committee, and I think I've kind of discussed this, was only presented the exterior portion of the code. This was a political decision of the previous chief building official, Terry Adams. We took this route because he had attempted to pass a property maintenance ordinance under a previous city administration, and that measure was met with fierce opposition from several individuals. Terry always believed that in the case of rental property, if the tenant invited him inside the property, he could use mechanical codes to correct the issues that were out of compliance with those codes. The shortcoming of that approach is that the city's only recourse for the problem, if not corrected, is to cut the electricity or the water to the property. I would like to stress that I'm giving you this information not to try to sway your decision one way or the other, but only so that you can make an informed decision either way. Jonesboro is a great place to live, work, play, and worship. I believe a large part of our success is that, for the most part, the people in this community treat others how they would want to be treated. They love their neighbor as themselves. Even those that don't embrace the one that said it, they embrace the principle taught therein. Not everyone does, however, and because of that, we have to have a set of rules. Laws are necessary because evil is found in some that will target the weak, the poor, and the unaware. That said, the Bill of Rights to the Constitution is necessary to restrain government because sometimes that evil is found in those that are supposed to protect us. Tonight, you will debate the issue that we have been studying for several weeks. I will act as your moderator. We will examine the arguments from all sides, and while robust debate of ideas is encouraged, I will not allow this to devolve in mudslinging, name-calling, or finger-pointing. All I ask is that while you passionately argue your views, you remember to treat each other how you would want to be treated. That is who we are. That's the end of my statement.
Perfect. Thank you. And I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank Todd and the other city officials that have been here every week. They have done their homework and have helped us through this process, and it's been a tremendous help in helping us understand all the technical lingo and things that we would never know before. And I know I've gotten an education about all kinds of things that I didn't know before I got here, and I really appreciate their dedication to the city. You have a fine city staff. You should be proud of them. The next thing, I just want to thank the committee because we've had some really late nights, and y'all have just been wonderful, and I thank you for it. And I just couldn't be prouder for the work we've done, and I just really wanted to give you my heartfelt thanks for that. Then I just want to cede the floor to Ms. Castile real quick and go from there.
Madam Chairman, I make a motion that we adopt the Jonesboro Property Maintenance Code by reference to include the changes by the committee to form the Jonesboro Property Maintenance Code in its entirety, both the interior and the exterior, with all the amendments and addendums.
Do I have a second?
I'd like to make a point of order, please. We have a tabled motion from old business that needs to be addressed prior to a new motion being made.
Go
That's
ahead.
actually not true. Both of the motions are unfinished business, and they can be taken up in any order.
Yes, that's according, we kind of checked that out.
And I guess I would say that, in my opinion, if this doesn't pass, or we get to another stalemate, then obviously we need to discuss that. But if this does pass, that's a moot point.
Again, I asked, do we have a second?
I still think there's a point of order.
Second.
Okay.
I'd like to make an motion to amend the motion.
Before we just dive down into this, let's do a couple things. And not asking for anybody to vote, but just so we understand where our thoughts lie, is we have discussed the property maintenance code and made recommendations to changes throughout this code. We have we self-segregated that into exterior and interior. So not asking to vote one way or the other, but just so we know where our common ground is and where our areas of contention are. If you support the interior portion of that, not saying that you're voting for only one or the other, but if you support the interior portion of that, would you just show by raising your hands? Okay. If you support the exterior portion of that, not saying exterior only, but that you support it, maybe you support it and the rest of it, or maybe you support it by itself, would you raise your hands and show that? So what we have is unanimous support for the exterior portion. So as we discuss this, there's no need to get bogged down into portions of the exterior. So obviously, we have some disagreement on the interior portion of this. Now, whatever motions come up and don't come up, at the end of the day, it kind of becomes irrelevant. Those rules of order are just to make sure things flow properly. And when we start trying to use it when we start kind of running into each other with them, at some point, common sense has to prevail, and we just say, okay, let's talk about the issue, and then we'll vote on the issue. Does that make sense?
I think, Todd, I agree with you 100%. And Jason, no disrespect. I mean, the reality is this. If we don't add the interior to the code, then obviously the table motion becomes extremely relevant unless everybody's going to just say we're not going to do anything, and then we've sat here for 2 months wasting our time on a whole thing. So as far as technicalities, I think you've got to have a record and you've got to have some order to it. But the reality is you just saw kind of people's opinions, and ultimately I don't think anybody should be able to walk out of the room and say, well, there was some parliamentary shenanigans that allowed us to make a decision. It needs to be a heartfelt truth from what we believe and what we've researched, and based on pure facts of what's going on in Jonesboro. So I would support whatever everyone thinks they're comfortable with to get to the decision, but the decision is really, are you going to adopt the whole code, or are you going to adopt part of the code? And I assume that nobody wants to not adopt anything. I mean, I've heard John say he's in favor of something, and you are. So everybody, and we just saw that. So I'm underscoring what you said. I don't want anyone to walk out of here and saying, well, there was some parliamentary maneuvering that allowed this to get through. I think it more importantly has to be 9 people who have vested interest in this for whatever reason, whether it's personal and financial or whether it's community interest, and then stand by that decision in that regard.
Anyone like to articulate their reason for or against addressing the interior portion of that? And I know we hashed a lot of this out last week, but I think it would be beneficial to kind of highlight the arguments, because again, we can have debate, as I think former Governor Beebe said, we can disagree without being disagreeable. So would anyone like to address their argument for or against the interior portion of that?
I think we've already addressed everything over the weeks and months and years.
One of the,
Vote on or do something. This is ridiculous.
one of the things I think you kind of got to look at is what part of it are you going to get done? What part of it is the city code going to be able to get done? And that's going to be exterior. It's what everybody sees. It's what everybody sees. You look at the broken window theory. You and I've talked about this. You taught it to me, and I looked it up. There was a study one time where they took a car and put it in a nice neighborhood and raised the hood and opened the doors and all that stuff, and within 24 hours, the battery was gone. And before long, once they started messing with it, it was completely torn apart. They took it in a bad neighborhood and opened the doors and the windows, and it took about an hour.
Physical disorder is an attractant to crime, and crime helps speed physical disorder.
Right.
They work in conjunction with each other.
So if you just look at it from a standpoint of what it's going to cost the taxpayers and even the trouble it's going to be, you're going to fix so many problems on the exterior that you're going to chase off a lot of the interior. I've said it before. There's nobody here that's got a more vested interest in seeing either part of it pass. Either part. You know well as I do. My apartments are surrounded by some disarray out there for sure. My house. I told somebody, I was talking to the chief of police one day, and I said in a 6-month period there was two trailers stolen, two lawnmowers stolen, a 4-wheeler attempted stolen, a weed eater, several other things. Two house invasions where they were empty houses and they just ended up living there. And the chief said, well, it's pretty bad on the north side. And I said, no, that's my neighborhood on the south side. And that was true. And at the same time, I had 0 crime during that very period in my apartment complex. Of course, you know what we did. We worked hard to get all of that to do it. And I appreciate you recognizing that. But you and I already know what it takes. But there's so many things that come around the interior. I know police officers, one of the most dangerous situations they can get into is a domestic abuse. They don't want to go inside, do they? I mean, they tell me, no, that's one of the most dangerous things to enter somebody's house as it is. If we fix the broken window theory if we fix the broken windows, if we fix the exterior, we're going to end up taking care of so many interiors too at the same time. And it's selling it to the city. It's got to be sold to the rest of the community has got to understand. And they don't really understand. When you read that, you can tell them all day long, hey, you've got the right to tell somebody not to come in. But I've said it before, if you walked up to my 21-year-old daughter and said, I need to come inside and look inside this house, she's going to shake in her shoes right there and let you in, and then you may find something that you can use at that point. And I really don't think our city officials are going to abuse that whatsoever. It's just not going to happen. I just don't believe it'll happen. And so I'm as much on the fence of it. I just think that we get so much more done. I'm a simpler person. I think we get so much more done if you guys concentrated and only had to run calls on the outside. And in a couple of years, why not add the interior if it works well? If you're able to clean the city up, everything looks good. We run off a lot of undesirables, and that's the part of it. I mean, I did a little research on the Willows. I understand that when the Willows was closed down, the tenants got 24 hours to leave. Is that right?
I don't know.
That's what I read. I mean, whether it's right or wrong, the tenants were, once they condemned it, and that's 2007, I think, wasn't it? They were given 24 hours to exit. There were dozens of people that the city said, go find another place to live. You know, what'd they do? What did they do? You know, so we need a little more compassion sometimes, I think. But I'm for a code that addresses the exterior. I think you get more done. It's not going. I'm going to profit either way. I'm going to benefit. Dan's going to benefit. We don't have any rents down there in those levels. You know, our rents are way above what those folks are paying in the where that's the only place they can afford. You know, and I think they don't. Nobody deserves to live in a rat infested slum at all. But we're going to have to find a way to house them too somehow, because right now they can't. As you say, they ain't got another place to go. They don't have another place to go. We've even admitted that they don't have another place to go. So what are we going to do with them? They can't move into my place because they can't afford it.
A lot of the places I've done several driving tours of the city over the last few weeks, and you know, I'd go through an area of town that had a problem, and I would find the worst place, and I would do some research to see, like the owner, etc., and to a T, everyone that was the worst was a large owner. Had numerous rental properties, or was managed by a management company. I looked at John's and Dan's, and I would have to say that relative to some of the ones in their neighborhoods, theirs were in better shape. And so I can't even imagine people having much to complain about theirs, but some of the ones around theirs were really bad, and they were definitely the big guy, not the little guy. I'm not going to obviously call names, but I've got pictures if anybody ever wants to see them, and some of them, you know, are ridiculous, and you can tell by looking that the interior and the exterior is not fit for human habitation. One didn't have windows, and it's listed on Zillow as being a 1-bedroom, 1-bath residential, renting for almost $700. And so they're not renting them for cheap. I kind of have I shouldn't say that because it's just a gut feeling about what I think is going on there. But anyway, nevertheless, it's definitely a big guy taking advantage of a little guy. And to a T, I mean, every single one of them that I picked out of those residential areas that had problems were large corporations buried under stacks of large corporation names till you got to the real true owner. And so that's where my heart was on this whole thing. And sometimes I probably got a little too passionate about it. But are those kinds of folks that people that know better are taken advantage of. And I think that you almost have to deal with the interior of those kinds of things. Because I met one lady at National Night Out, and she didn't even think she had a right to a voice because she didn't own property. And I said, no, ma'am, you have a say. In fact, you have a big say. So that's kind of sad to me. So we do have a motion and a second. And so I would kind of like to call for the question, and let's go forward.
The next thing we would do after that would be ask for discussion. So
Okay,
that's
okay.
where we are is we're trying to hash those arguments out. So if anybody else has an argument, again, for or against, now would be the time to make that argument.
Well, I hate to just leave a lot of points sitting out there. Just in a methodical way, the right of entry comments that have been made throughout the city are most of the time not factual. And we've been over that several times in this committee. The mayor actually came to the first or second meeting and explained that again. It was explained in the public hearing. So right of entry is no different than the people who run the ambulance services, the firefighter services, the building code inspectors. There are three ways someone can get in your house. You can be a criminal, and the police can need to come in and investigate that. You can be invited in, or if there's some situation where the resident is in harm's way and it's apparent to the city officials or to the neighbors, you can go before a judge and you can get permission to help that person. That's the end of that. It's as plain as day. As far as what you all can accomplish with the code passed in its entirety, that's not really why we're here. That's an administrative logistical issue. If it requires that you have to work a little harder, see a few more things done, get some more help, that's the price we have to pay for 20 years of not having an entire industry totally unregulated. I, out of the sense of fairness, am probably one of the first people who asked to not segregate out properties. I think what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And what I mean by that is that whether it's multifamily or it's single rental family or it's single residential, this study that's 350 pages pretty much shows that the problem is rental property. There are 10,000 rental properties in Jonesboro. And some people, and I guess to use another saying, one or two bad apples can really spoil the whole bunch. And I think that your comments, Todd, about John, I already knew every bit of that. In fact, we're using a model that you used in your apartment complex at a park here in our neighborhood to lower crime. So I do think you should be commended, but you're not the bad apple. And there are bad apples in here, and there's significant numbers of them, and there are significant properties. So I don't see what you can and can't do once this code is implemented as really a reason to vote for or against this. I think that that's something that Tim's going to have to deal with, and Todd, that's something you and the mayor have to deal with what staff do you need, what are the logistics, what's the computer program to keep up with it or whatever. But the reason that it's going to be overwhelming to you in the beginning is because there's been no regulations for 2 decades, which brings me to the next point. We can do a little bit today, and 2 or 3 years from now, we can do more. Well, that's not what the history shows. This is the 4th attempt in 2 decades to get this done. One time it was totally voted down post haste because the present day or the past city administration at that time would go on the list of despicable landlords. I'll just say it outright. And so they weren't about to have any regulation. The second time, there's very little record of it, was about 2007-8. And again, a small group of people with personal financial gain got to the city council, talked them into going their way, even though there were 150 people who were representing an industry as opposed to looking at what was good for the city. So it failed the second time. The third time was the moratorium committee, or the third committee, whatever you want to call it. Many of you were part of that. We followed it closely. There are no minutes to those meetings. There was not a chair elected. There were no, really, as I understand, any conclusions made other than some pros and cons. And that committee never even looked at the whole code. They looked at part of the code. So this premise that 2 or 3 years from now, we can get this done more completely, to me, does not stand up by what's happened in the history of the city. And so you get something done today, the next time this could be revisited, we may all be retired or dead, I don't know. But 2 or 3 years from now, they'll say, oh, it's all fine and don't worry about it. As far as police clearing out houses and the broken window theory, I think y'all said all the right things about that. I mean, these properties we're discussing, or if I were a police officer, I would be afraid to go into a lot of them. I'd be very careful. And I'm very familiar. I take care of people with gunshot wounds quite often. And I know what it means to clear a house. I know what it means when you got on body armor to clear a house. And the houses we're discussing are really putting some of our police, I believe, in harm's way. The Willows Apartments, and no offense by this, I just have a couple of questions. I've done extensive research about this whole issue, and taking it the same way I would if I were studying to learn how to do a new operation. I don't have any records of how many people were in there when it was condemned, nor do I know whether they were given 24-hour notice. So that's conjecture. I would like to know that. I think it's important facts to know. Only person, I guess, Tim, that's your department. You could investigate and see how that was handled. But, there again, those people found themselves really victimized by the fact that the landlords who handled the Willows apartments, and I don't know who owned them, so if I'm insulting somebody, I don't mean to be, but whoever owned them didn't treat the tenants correctly by keeping good apartments. So it wasn't the city's fault that those people got evicted with nowhere to go. It was the fault of a landlord who didn't do their job. So to me, and this is just logic, and I mean, I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I'm just telling you facts. If they don't have another place to go, they can call me. Mary Ellen and I work quite extensively, and I'll just point out in one particular community in town, the Hispanic community, and quite often we are approached by a young married couple who'll come and say, we need a place to live. We can pay $450 a month, but we want this to be safe and clean. And I can give you the name of several of your colleagues, and you could too. I know you're very involved in the Landlord Association. And this young lady will have them a clean, nice, safe apartment within a day. So I don't contend that people will have nowhere to go. Now, I will also tell you there are some tenants that may not have the wherefore to do that, to look for another place. The other thing that I think we need to really think about is that every time that you bulldoze down a house, you've lost a tax base. And so actually this whole thing is costing the city a ton of money in that way. I mean, to be able to, and I sort of mentioned this to some of the city officials, to go to a public meeting and have the comment made that we've condemned 150 to 200 houses in the last several months. I don't know if that's totally accurate, but I think that's what's been said quite often. You've lost 200 homes. Why'd you lose them? Because nobody's maintaining them. And I just have one last comment, John, and that is that you made this comment which opened my eyes. You said if there's, in the broken window theory, which I know what that is. And so you've said if it's bad on the outside, quote, it's bad on the inside.
I agree.
Well, I just tell you, in my opinion, people live inside their house. They don't live outside their house. And I just don't see the logic of giving you guys a few things in your toolbox when really your goal, in my opinion, what your job is to help people, not to hurt people. And so if you have all of these ordinances, this complete code, you have all kind of places to go to improve these properties. And I just don't see the value of knowing just a little bit about a house. If it looks, I agree with you 100%. If it looks bad on the outside, it's going to be bad on the inside. So why would you want to leave that? And as far as tenants' rights go, if you look at the Arkansas statutes from the Arkansas Legal Services for landlords and tenants, the right of entry for you is limited. The right of entry for a landlord is not limited unless you put it in your lease that you specifically need 24 hours notice to go in to have someone come in your apartment or restrict their entry some other way. A landlord has the legal right to go in your house day or night for a myriad of reasons, about 10 of them. All the way from they want to see if you're tearing up their house to they want to fix the faucet or they want to add some decorations. And this is legal consultation. This is not my opinion. These things I'm telling you are facts. And so why would it be okay to give the landlords the full right of entry day or night to a house that you're renting or leasing, but it's not okay for the city officials to be able to go in there with permission, with invitation, to help you have a little better stead? So I think I tried my best to methodically kind of address your concerns. And I just, for me, this is not a financial, personal issue. This is about community. It's about Jonesboro. It's about property values. It's about tax base. It makes no sense to me whatsoever to be talking about fixing 20 egresses or intersections or whatever y'all have got on your other plan so that people can drive around the city and see the blight that we have that much easier if you're not going to fix that too. It just goes to me to being a proud community where we all live. And, you know, I know this may be a really ridiculous request, but I would implore John, Dan, and Jason, I would implore you guys to look at some of the things I've tried to point out. And when we vote on this, I would like nothing better than for you to support it, because I think we as a committee have maybe a charge to go out in the city, give out the factual information as it is in this book of 350 pages, and explain to people that we are not trying to be oppressive to them. We're trying to help. And that's how I'm viewing it, and that's why I'm going to vote in favor of the whole code. I also would say if we weren't going to support the whole code, why did we sit here for 6 or 8 weeks going through this line by line, and every section we went to that anybody on this committee with mutual respect, we took out, we hashed it out, we worked it out. And so I would say we're probably the experts on this thing, if anybody is. I would dare say I don't know how many other people have read it completely. And so I guess I've taken a lot of time, but I think it's important that we don't leave these things just hanging out there. Thank you.
Todd, I have real brief too about the houses that I looked at. Over half of them were owned by absentee landlords that use management companies, you know, to manage. And there's a study that I have too available. Anybody that wants it about crime is related to absentee landlords, and there is a direct correlation to that because they don't tend to care if they're not living here. So if anybody wants a copy of that study, I'd be more than happy to provide that with them. Provide them with that. Let me say that correctly. Sorry.
How many of those homes were homeowner homes?
None.
You saw
Zero.
none dilapidated homes in Jonesboro?
Well, the ones, I picked the worst ones. I didn't go through and pick the little ones that had maybe just a little bit of stuff. I'm talking about the ones that needed the most attention, that would probably get their calls first, were all to a T, landlord owned. Half of them were out of town. One of them is the neighbor has to mow the yard because the people that own it do not mow the yard. And that particular home, the person that lives out of town is in the process of building a $700,000 house, but won't mow their yard. And the neighbor's doing it for free. So, you know, it's a problem. It's a real problem, and it's just not right. It's not very neighborly. So anyway, now I'd really like to go back because I really think we've hashed this out, and we've taken up everybody's time so much. So I would really like to call for the question if I could.
Hey, Todd, didn't you tell me how many homes were demolished in Jonesboro in the last, was there a period of time that you had?
Last year, and I'm
Last
going
year.
from memory, we addressed, I want to say 59 or 60 houses. Now, of those 60, the city paid for only a handful of them through both grants and through our office. Most of the rest of them were torn down by either the owner or they sold the property to an owner to tear it down, and a few of those were rehabbed.
But they were condemnations, almost all. The mayor, when he came to the West End and addressed this problem with us about a year ago, 6 months ago, the number he was talking about at that time was 160. I will confess to you, I did not have the wherefore to go back through every city council meeting, but if you do, there are almost at every city council meeting 4 or 5 condemnations. And so the number's somewhere between 160 and 200 over the last decade, or maybe the last 3 years, I guess would be the right answer.
And y'all didn't try to identify whether they were previous rentals, abandoned,
No.
how they got in that shape whatsoever,
I would
right?
say high 90+% of them were vacant. So we don't know if they have been rental homes. Most single-family rental homes don't start off as single-family rental homes.
That's right.
Most of them at some point are owner-occupied and they get sold, and then they might be rental property, and then they might turn around and be homeowner-occupied again. So there would be no way for us to be able to track that.
Somebody might have lost it in a foreclosure. They could have. If there are 10,000 rentals in Jonesboro, how many homes are in Jonesboro?
Total homes?
Yeah. Is there a number?
There's about 13,000 non-rentals, and those, the 10,000 counts every unit, so apartments as well.
Okay.
So there's about 23,000. There's 53%, I believe, homeowners, and 40, whatever the backside of that would be, what would they be, 47% rentals?
So the 10,000 number includes an apartment complex that might have 500?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so
That's
that would
units.
knock down the number of structures for sure, right?
Well, yes, sir. And the structures are broken out in this study if you're interested for any reason. In fact, the structures are really a lot less than you would imagine, but some of them are pretty big, as you just alluded to.
Yeah, yeah.
And if you haven't taken the time to read this first JQuad study, February 2012, that we actually did pay $50,000 for the two studies together, it's pretty remarkable. I mean, it's focus groups. It's a much broader group than we are, and they came to some of the same conclusions that we're all trying to support here today. The other thing that they came to the conclusion of, and again, I just think it's a sense of fairness that we can all live under the same rules. Really and truly, if you just put this code into place for rental property alone, you would identify 90% of the problem. That's their quote. But I don't agree with that, because I think I told you the story of a couple of houses in our neighborhood that are owned by other not rentals, who probably need a little encouragement to fix their house. And to me, you can all live under the same rules if they're fair.
It would surprise me if 95% of the dilapidated buildings are just.
Well, it's not my number. It's not an opinion that's thrown out there. It's right here in this book.
Wow, they paid for that.
Well, they did the work. They met with focus groups after focus group. They made telephone interviews. They toured the city.
They called me.
Photos. Yeah, you're mentioned, I believe, as providing a lot of phone numbers to them from the Landlord Association. But it's also an interesting statistic, and I'm not trying to, again, skewer anybody, but I think it's important to know the data. And if the landlords were asked, I think there was 8,000 potential phone calls that could be made. They made about 4,000 and talked to people with a survey, and they asked the landlord, if you will, and I'm a landlord of sorts, to rate their properties. Well, they rated them on a scale of 1 to 10. The lowest rating a landlord gave their property was 4, and that was 9% of them. Everybody else said they were average or above average, so the other 91% said that. And then they went back and actually looked at how the non-biased staff of the JQuad people out of Texas rated them, and they rated them with 88% of them needing repairs. And so the correlation between the landlord rating the property and someone who's not biased, not even from Jonesboro, rating the property was dismal. I mean, they didn't correlate in any way. And so the objectivity of properties of value and their maintenance, et cetera, is totally lost when the landlord rates the property. That may be the example of the fox guarding the hen house. I don't know. But it's kind of like surgeons being asked how their operative times are. We never know, but the nurses can tell you. And so the people who are looking at this stuff objectively rated the properties, I believe, fairly. And again, not my opinion. That's what's in the book.
Let me propose this and see what you guys think. It's my understanding from what we discussed earlier that everybody was in favor of the exterior portion. So without having to bebop back and forth between different motions, I would submit that we write a vote, and you either write one, you are in favor of the entire code as amended, or two, in favor of the exterior portion.
Todd, I think everybody knows where they're at. I think you could just take a voter record. Nobody's going to change their mind at this point. I just take a vote and let it stand. And you know who's for what.
You don't want to do it written?
We can go home. Just we can go home.
Everybody knows where we're at. Let's just vote it and you'll know where everybody
And
stands.
the one thing we got to understand is, it's just our recommendation. City council do whatever they want to. And then that will be the people's voice at that point. They come to the meeting and say, hey, I disagree with John and Dan and disagree with them, and that's fine. I mean, that's just, a man convinced against his will is the same opinion still. We're all going to stay where we are, so.
Okay. So if that works for everybody here, I will call your name. And when I do, let me know if you are in favor of the entire code as amended or the exterior portion of the code as amended.
So how are we going to do that now? Explain.
You're going to tell me if you're in favor of the entire code as amended or the exterior code.
Got it.
Todd, why don't you
Say
just,
entire or exterior. Your vote can either be entire.
Entire or exterior is your vote. Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
do it that way.
That work?
That works.
Yes.
Okay. Teresa Beck.
Entire.
Mike Boone.
Entire.
Buddy Nichols.
Entire.
Jason Whitley.
Exterior.
John Harden.
Exterior.
Dan Passmore.
Exterior.
Judy Castile.
Excuse me, entire.
Lillian Cobb.
Interior.
no.
Now,
Would entire or?
entire.
Entire or exterior?
I'm supposed to say
We
interior.
knew what you wanted.
Don't say exterior. We want the everything.
The whole enchilada.
That's right, sweetie. Every bit of it.
So it looks like I have 6 people for the entire code and 3 people for the exterior code. Am I missing anything?
You got it.
Are we done?
Go home.
I move that we be dismissed, and I thank everybody again for being here and for all the hard work. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.